I'm very happy to have back with us actually, Dr. Farrukh Iqbal, an economist, who's retired from the World Bank. He's just come back from Pakistan, from Karachi, after a pretty long stay. He's going to talk to us about the economic challenges facing the new government in Pakistan. Let's listen to him. Over to you, Dr. Farrukh.
Good afternoon, Subodh. Thank you for inviting me to this session. Yes, I was in Pakistan for almost a month. It overlapped with the elections on February the 8th. And there was an interesting period after the elections when results, which were supposed to be announced within a few days, were delayed for a while. And it became clear why they were delayed pretty soon. So I'll just talk a little bit about what the elections, what happened, and how one might characterize first the political situation after the elections, and second the economic situation. Right. The big message is neither the political nor the economic situation has changed dramatically. And I'll go over why I think that's the case, all right? So first of all, the elections were unconvincing. The results were unconvincing. They were not believed by people. There is a sense that there were irregularities and outright fraud and so on and so forth. So no one really believes that the votes as allocated truly represent the will of the people. Okay, and what that means is basically a weak coalition government has been formed with the two principal non-PTI parties, meaning the parties against Imran Khan, which is the Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz and the Pakistan People's Party. They have formed a weak coalition government. They have some additional votes from other people, but that's basically what the situation is. And
Farrukh, 1 second.
Yes, go ahead.
Could you explain the word weak?
Weak means, the best way to explain this is that essentially a party needed about 135 votes to form a majority. The single biggest vote getter was a group called Independents. And they were called Independents because the PTI, Imran Khan's party, was not allowed to run under its own name and symbol. So these were all independents, and they went around telling people that they are Imran Khan people, but they are forced to register as independents. All right, but they didn't have 135. No one had 135. So the Pakistan Muslim League, which had about 70, and the People's Party, which had 55. So they got together and added a third party, and they got over the 135-person limit, and they form a government, right? But this government is clearly weak in the sense that it's A, doesn't have the support of the people. Remember the argument that this is a fraudulent election. And B, there's a substantial group now sitting in parliament, which will make life difficult for the people who have a narrow majority, all right? And there is a severe disillusionment about the political process. Even before, it was generally known that the army would often tip an election one way or the other. But this time it's been so blatant that people are just disgusted by the manner in which this was carried out, right? And frankly, at this stage, I would say all three major organs of government are mistrusted or in disrepute. This means the judiciary, the parliament, and the military. All right. So in terms of context, that's not a great context for the economy where the political setup is just not very positive, if you will. Now, what about economic challenges? Well, the same economic challenges that prevailed before the election are still present with minor differences. And these were an economy that has been teetering at the brink of default with respect to debt servicing for 2 years. That roughly remains the case, although just before the elections, the previous government had managed to get a standby arrangement with the IMF, and that calmed the markets. And so the elections were conducted in the positive glow of a successful standby arrangement with the IMF.
And that was by the caretaker government.
That was by the caretaker. It was just before the caretaker government.
Okay.
It was at the tail end of the PML Nawaz government that had taken over in 2022. All right. But the caretaker government fulfilled all of the conditions of the SBA and saw the economy and economic management through to the next phase. And in fact, so one of the things that has just happened is earlier this week, the last review of the standby arrangement was successfully cleared.
Okay.
Right? And that means Pakistan will get another tranche of $1.1 billion under this, which again helps calm nerves mostly. It doesn't add that much to reserves, but at least people begin to think, well, if they've committed to good macroeconomic management, everything else will work out. So there's a great psychological boost from that.
And just to confirm, this is a loan. It's not a grant. When you say they get 1.1.
Oh, yes. It's not only a loan, it's a short-term loan.
Okay.
It has to be paid back between 3 to 5 years, depending on the situation.
Right.
Yes. No, these IMF loans are not great from a debt management point of view, but they're great from a default, staving off default point of view.
Yeah. When you're desperate, you just need cash for the next day.
Exactly. And unfortunately, that has been the situation in Pakistan, that they seem to be managing month to month, year to year. There really isn't enough momentum in the economy and enough ballast in the economy to kind of make one think, well, we can make plans for the next 10 years. It's just not there. But anyhow, first, so let me kind of give you a few optimistic things and then really get to the nub of the matter. My overall projection, if you will, is somewhat pessimistic, right? So the last review of the SBA has been done. And what is good is that the new government, right, has made all the right noises about quickly getting a 3-year extended financing agreement with the fund, EFF, right? That's like a 3-year SBA, meaning there's a fund program with macro targets, and if you stay in, you get, I think they'll go for about $6 to $7 billion over 3 years, right?
Right.
But this is a tough one, and because this is reviewed every 3 months.
Okay.
So there are 4 reviews a year, and you have to meet targets for all quarters, as it were. Okay. But I would say that the good noises being made by the government, that's a good sign. At least they've got a group of people who are not from the beginning saying, we don't really want to do this, right? So they've got something they've learned something from the past 10 years of misadventure, okay?
And is there anyone else they are seeking loans from, or grants or loans or money?
Well, sure. So what happens is that the IMF is in quantitative terms a very small lender. The big lenders are China, and in terms of even emergency funding, you get much more from China than from the IMF, right? And then, of course, the World Bank has ongoing loans projects which keep generating inflows and so on and so forth. So that's also a reasonable. And the ADB, right? These are the three big ones. But China is certainly important to this equation. So the good news is that once again we have gotten into a stabilization program. The bad news is there is nothing about the political or economic context which suggests that this time things will be different, right? And by that I mean the following. Since 2008, Pakistan has had 1, 2, 3, and this is the fourth IMF arrangement. In 3 of these arrangements, they abandoned the conditions midway. In the fourth case, they successfully completed the program, but then immediately reversed course afterwards, meaning they allowed the fiscal deficit to expand significantly beyond beyond what they had just implemented for the previous 3 years, right? Suggesting that they were not serious about macroeconomic management. They were only going through fiscal consolidation because they were in an IMF program and had to continue. But as soon as they were out, meaning as soon as they had graduated from that, they macroeconomic policy turned towards deficits and so on and so forth. So that introduces my pessimism, which is that nothing fundamental has changed. The same people are in power who have in previous episodes of economic management and governance showed that they are not truly keen on deep reform, which will affect the economic fortunes of their constituencies or their major donors or key elements of their support system. Okay? And all that happens is they get into a terrific bind, they get into a short-term default prospect, and then they run around saying, okay, we promise, anything you say we'll promise, and just get us through the next 2-3 years, right? And it seems like this will be one more turn of the same, of the carousel, and there is no reason to believe that we should expect very different results. Okay.
Can I come in on the economic
Sure.
aspect?
Yeah.
Just 2 very simple points, and you can say I'm right or I'm wrong. One, the economic model does not generate adequate incomes for a huge number of the poor.
Right.
But the government, whether it is properly elected or not properly elected, it doesn't matter, feels a need to raise their consumption levels. And so that happens through subsidies. Number 2, the rich don't want to pay taxes because they run the government. And so they don't pay the taxes. So the fiscal revenue in Pakistan as a share of GDP is much less. And if the fiscal revenue is low and the fiscal expenditure on subsidies is high, you are stuck.
Yeah. So I mean, some elements of that are correct, but there are important nuances.
Okay.
So first of all, subsidies are not a major element, but they are a significant element. Okay. The reason they're not a major element is because over the past 30 years, we've had to go back to the IMF and the World Bank so many times that they've squeezed a lot of that out.
Okay.
Right. Nevertheless, there are energy subsidies given to the industrial sector, for example. the prices at which now the industrial sector complains that they still have very high prices relative to neighboring countries, right? So the dollar prices of electricity in Pakistan are higher than in India and Bangladesh and so on and so forth. At the same time, even these high prices have some element of subsidy. I don't know the subsidy structure in India and Bangladesh. They may also have subsidies for certain groups. But it's important to realize that's there. Agricultural subsidies, there are those as well, but they're not huge, right? The really significant subsidies, which really apply to energy, have been cut back quite a lot under IMF pressure for the last 10, 15 years.
Okay. All right. Fair
right?
enough.
So a few other things. Pakistan's revenues to GDP, or at least tax revenues to GDP, is not very different from India and Bangladesh.
I see. Okay.
Right? Probably all three should be considered low revenue or low tax regimes. They find it difficult to raise, at least income tax. I mean, other things, yes, maybe. The problem, and Pakistan's expenditures to GDP are 20% of GDP. Again, not very different from India. But the problem is we have no cushion. So even if, and remember, in fiscal deficits, Pakistan's deficits are also comparable to what India and Bangladesh achieve. And yet the economic situation, the reserves position are so very different across these three countries. And the main reason seems to be that the other two countries have an export engine that works very well, and even high fiscal deficits don't automatically lead to external problems, servicing problems. In our case, if they run a fiscal deficit of 5 to 7% for 3 years, in the fourth year, they have a financing problem. Not a government financing problem, an exchange. They don't have enough foreign exchange.
Right, I understand. Okay.
And so in the last 20 years, roughly every 5 years or so, the Pakistani economy has had what I call a heart attack experience.
Mm-hmm.
And by that I mean they've run international reserves down to less than 2 months of import cover.
Yeah.
Right? Which for Pakistan now means that they have something when they have something close to $8 billion in reserves, that's just 2 months of imports.
I see.
Okay? 8 billion. I mean, it's a laughable
number.
It's a laughable number for a major economy with 240 million people. Correct. And a $300 billion GDP.
Right, it is.
Right?
Yes.
But they can't, right? And so part of it is, why don't they have a decent economic growth and foreign exchange earning engine, which both Bangladesh and India have developed in the last 30 years. All right. So this is sort of a bit of a nuance, because if you just look at the macro numbers, they don't look too bad. By the way, even on the macro numbers, even the debt is less than 40% of GDP, the external debt. It's not like 100% of GDP. Total debt, yes, but not external debt.
Yeah.
And yet with this relatively small percentage, they are unable to manage emergencies, and they get emergencies every 3 to 5 years. And the emergencies arise because of what I call a political business cycle. Certain groups needing to use the political system to take rents and various sort of for that.
So what you're saying, Farrukh, is that the failure to export is the key structural problem.
That's what I think, exactly. So if I had to boil it all down to one thing, boil it down to one thing, I'm sort of saying, look, it's the failure to export. If we had an export engine of some sort, it would prevent these heart attacks. And the heart attacks they have to do with external financing. They don't have to do with rupee financing and so on and so forth. But when you go to the IMF, They have a standard set of instruments which are, all right, you don't have enough money, cut down expenses, try to raise revenues, right? Which is essentially a focus on the fiscal.
Yeah.
Now, that's okay, but at that point, if we point out, but India has the same fiscal and Bangladesh has the same fiscal, they just look at you and say, so what can we do? You came to us, we're telling you, you don't have enough money, so you have to tighten your belt.
Right. Okay.
It doesn't matter if somebody else in the same situation doesn't have to tighten their belt because, as I said, they don't have the foreign exchange constraint that we do, right? Anyhow, so my sense is that this is true. The failure to export is a major issue. It was an issue before the elections. It is an issue even now. Our economy, as I said before, is roughly managed on a year-to-year basis, and there has been no sustained effort made to break out of the poor export situation. We are now in a situation where our exports are only about $30 billion. Even nominally, the export value has not changed significantly for the last 10 years.
Yeah.
Maybe it's gone from 25 billion to 30 billion, but that's hardly anything.
Can I add that depreciation
Sure.
is not the answer because the Pakistani rupee has already depreciated significantly.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So
Yes.
more of that is not the answer.
Yeah. Well, it's part of it, but it's not going to take you. So there has to be just much more. The term that is used is export promotion, but its content has to be, fairly well thought out and implemented. I keep thinking back to what I had learned about the Korean experience when I was at the World Bank, and my first job as country economist was Korea. And that's when I began to learn in the early 80s, mid 80s, about how the Koreans had managed their export boom starting in the 1960s, right? And much of that had to do with a very systematic focus on exports. So the Koreans were crony capitalists, but the capitalists had to hold up their end of the bargain. Their end was, you have to export and you have to give people jobs. As long as you do that, we will give you credit. We will make sure you get your inputs at a decent price, and so on and so forth. But you have to keep generating exports. If you come to me and say, I built this, I have this really successful construction business, I'm going to put you in jail.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's not an export business. If you tell me I have a very successful construction business in Thailand, I'm going to give you money. That's an export business, which actually Hyundai did. This is what President Park Chung-hee said to the Hyundai chairman, that as long as he was generating export income, whether it was from construction or from textiles or from anything else, that was good. Anyhow, a flavor of that. And that's where things stand at the moment. We faced a stabilization crisis. We are now getting through that. After we're done with that, we still face the longer run growth and a transformation crisis. There's nothing to me right now that suggests that they will be able to do that. Yeah. So now in between, there are all kinds of new challenges and other issues and so on and so forth. Last year, for example, when 22-23, the economy was severely affected by floods.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to ask.
Yes, and the floods were related to climate change.
Yes.
Right? So anytime now discussion of economic difficulties comes up, people say, oh, yes, but it's due to climate change. The answer is yes, but not entirely.
Yeah.
And many other challenges like this will come up. COVID was a challenge. The floods were a challenge. external conflict. Now again, it's starting up with Afghanistan, for example. That could be a challenge. All of these things will matter. But an economy that has an export engine can deal with these matters separately, and it does not become a life and death question. For us, it becomes a life and death question. Yeah?
All right, wonderful. Okay. Yeah. What's your next point? Do you have some other points?
Well, this is the main point.
Okay.
It turns out that there are some minor things that may create problems as well. So I'll just mention a few things, which is that because of the political discord and the manner in which the elections were carried out and the results arranged, my feeling is that the PTI, Imran Khan's party, which has close to 100 seats in parliament out of the 270, may actually play a spoiler role. Meaning, even if the government, the coalition government, introduces what most people would think are reasonably good policies, a significant segment of parliament will try to derail those policies in order to, out of anger at the way their government was removed, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So in other words, it's unlikely to be any cooperation from a significant group in parliament. And for some things, you need that.
Okay.
So that, to me, that's a worry, that even if you think up of some good policies that should be done, such as privatization, for example, the national airline, there's a defunct steel mill, and so on and so forth. There still are a bunch of SOE, state-owned enterprises, that need to be fixed. It's hard for me to imagine that it'll be easy to get political consensus around that. Okay. So that could be an issue for them.
What is the sort of target growth rate that Pakistan should have, GDP growth rate?
So the way I normally think about it is as follows. Whenever the government is under an IMF program, in order to make its numbers work, the IMF has to have certain growth assumptions, right?
Yes.
And those become the targets, because if those assumptions do not bear out, then all of the other things, the fiscal deficit, the monetary and all of that conditions, don't add up, at least not in the IMF's programming model, right?
Right.
So that's the one I use. That usually is in the range of 3 to 6% growth rates to be achieved progressively over 3 years.
Okay.
Okay, and that's roughly what it is. And this, to many economists with a strong sense of that the jobs have to be provided and so on and so forth. So everybody will point out, no, the economy must grow at 8%. But Pakistan has not shown any momentum of that sort to grow at 8%. Right? 5% is achievable, and it happens, 5 to 6%. But then they run into this heart attack problem, and then the next 2 years are miserable.
Okay. So, all right.
So that's where we stand.
4 to 6% by 3, 4 to 6%.
Yeah. Right. But if you ask me, how did we get there? Well, as I said, these are numbers that basically that the IMF says are consistent with the kind of fiscal stabilization that they are working with. Right. And so you may as well accept those, because I don't think there's a good model to predict anything for Pakistan.
No, I think so. Fair enough on that. I mean, and what is the sort of, it's very hard for one person to get a sense of the mood of but certainly in a big city like Karachi, what is the
Yes.
mood of the poor people or the average person?
So I would say, I mean, so first of all, Karachi now has about 25 million people.
Yeah.
So no average carries any representational power. Right?
Yeah.
So the thing is, what do you hear from different types of people, or if you happen to be on a street, what are you know? My sense is that things are very difficult right now for a very broad range of urban consumers. I would say running from the 90th percentile down to the 20th. So about 70%, that would be my sense. The bottom 20% who are, let's say, self-sufficient in agriculture or something, don't really work. They're not as affected by food prices. Right. They're growing their own, right?
Right.
And the top 10%, basically, it doesn't matter what prices are. Their sources of income are significant, and they can, they might complain, but they can manage.
Okay.
But they still leave 70% in the middle, and that's a significant number. And I would say, yes, Karachi, you get a strong sense of discomfort, disquietude, actually, among educated people not being able to make ends meet and so on and so forth. It's compared to just 3-4 years ago, the situation is tighter.
Okay.
Right? And that's because for the last 2 years, inflation has been running at above 30%.
Okay.
Right? Heavily influenced by the price of food and the price of oil and electricity.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is the financial markets like? I mean, are they looking forward to things from the new government, or there's no?
Yes. So once again, so the financial markets are very thin. Pakistan's stock market, for example, only has roughly 500 to 520 listed companies. That's it. And this number has not grown in the last 5 years. It's either stayed the same or gone down a bit. Okay. So when we say financial markets and mean the stock market, we're really talking about a very small gambler's den. Okay. It's not, while it may have an impact on the economy or on, it's entirely for psychological reasons.
Okay.
Right? What happens in the stock market is of limited consequence and limited weight in the economy, right? So that's one important thing. But the day a government is, for example, a few days after the election, when it was clear that there would be a government, of course, the stock market rises.
Yeah.
Then there is some delay in choosing a finance minister, it goes down. Then the agreement with the IMF is achieved, it will go up by, by 10% or so, and so on and so forth. So all of these things happen, but I don't pay much attention to that. The key thing, however, is when you have high inflation and you are under an IMF program, interest rates are very high. So right now, the policy rate in the economy is 22%.
Okay.
Okay. Now, this is not directly connected to inflation fighting in the sense that, high rates play that role in Western economies, because a very large fraction of the economy is not connected to the credit market. It's not borrowing at 22%. It's not borrowing at all. So, right? So so it affects the top of the industrial sector, large companies, and for them also it affects their working capital costs. No one really looks at this for investment costs because
Okay.
they are spread out over a large number of many years and so on and so forth. But it sort of creates a fear in the economy that costs are very high. It really does put a lot of pressure on the government because government debt is a major aspect of the financial system. Pretty much 50 to 60% of the credit extended by the banking system goes to the government, right?
Yeah.
And so if they have to pay 22% to get that, that's a lot of that's a lot of expense.
Okay.
Right. So the fiscal situation looks it's very difficult to deal with the fiscal situation when you're paying 22% on borrowing. Right?
True.
Domestic.
Okay.
So.
Okay, last question from me. Are there significant number of young people doing startups?
So on startups, because I have this statistical bent of mind, right?
We also know personal, I'm ready for anecdotal. You
Yeah,
work
okay,
in
so
an
then
academic institute, you know young people.
Not a problem.
Let's have both.
Let's have both. So first of all, of course, when you look at the economy as a whole and you see how many new businesses are formed and so on and so forth, large nationally representative random survey data kind of assessments of firm formation and so on and so forth suggest that the rate of entrepreneurship is low compared to other countries, right? And there are international data sets on this. There's something called the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor run by the London, I think LSE and London Business School that has, and relative, so, but this covers all kinds of activities by individuals and they're divided into various categories. So having said that, as you know, I had the privilege of being the head of a business school in Pakistan for 4 years.
Right.
And so I have lots of anecdotes which relate to the entrepreneurial behavior of the cohorts that graduated from that university, from that business school. And there I have to say that if you just look at those stories, you are very impressed by the degree of entrepreneurship, of enterprise exhibited by these people, and their interest and relative success, I would say, in the area of computer science and IT. So computer science IT is the second most popular major in the country at the college university level. And the reason for that is because people who do that get jobs, get opportunities to start their own businesses and so on and so forth. And there is one very important factor which connects with the social culture of Pakistan, which is that this is an area in which lots of women can earn money because they can do all this work at home. Right. They do not have to be in a public-facing situation.
Right.
This is something that can be done over the internet with a computer and so on and so forth.
Right.
And many young women are involved in home-based enterprise with an IT aspect to it. All right. Even if it's just cooking and selling food or something, right? They can run a business directly from their home using modern IT facilities.
Yeah.
Right? So I would say yes, that this is a point of light in an otherwise gloomy sort of setup, which is that there are lots of young people, and certainly at the leading edge of the educational system, these young people are showing a lot of enterprise, and they're tech savvy and they're kind of moving around in this milieu. So yes, so I would say certainly there's a lot of activity there.
Yeah, and that actually tends to multiply over time. That's
yes.
And
yes.
so, you get people who are not stuck in the old ways, who are not, I mean, even if, as you say, the women are at home, okay, you're a little bit stuck in the old ways, but you found a way to work around the old ways.
Found a way to work around that. Exactly.
So, the change has to come, and the economy, if your educated youth are depressed, then you have really no hope.
Yes. There's a lot of that too.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that too. Because again, as I said, what I observed was at the leading edge of the educational system, one of the better schools in the most commercial city, students from the top 20% in terms of socioeconomic background, and so on and so forth, right? But you can imagine that lots of young people from other contexts and backgrounds might find their investments in education to be not very productive or with low returns.
Okay. Right? A very, very stupid question.
Okay.
How many of them do you think are world-class but constrained by local factors?
So, well, to get, once again, I have lots of anecdotes simply because of where I was, right?
Yeah.
So my sense is again, so if you take Karachi and you take the top 10% of Karachi's college-educated students, right? My sense is that this top 10% is world-class, and it shows itself to be world-class by leaving the country and getting jobs in the rest of the world. Okay. So, and a lot in the Gulf, in the Gulf countries, including Saudi Arabia, quite a few in Asia, and of course, certainly the UK and the US continue to be important. So yes, so that's what I would say. I would say so the 10% of the higher education output, right?
Yeah, I'm asking that.
Right. So it's that's not too bad, I think, but it's and the remaining again of the good schools, many people get absorbed locally in various jobs and so on and so forth. But I'm just talking about the best schools. I'm not talking about.
I'm asking about the best schools. Because that's really, the breeding ground,
Exactly.
One of the breeding grounds. And if they are not breeding world-class people, then you have trouble. But if they are breeding world-class people who are facing local constraints, then the issue is not them, but the local constraints.
Yeah, exactly. I think you're very well put. Yeah. Yep. So, and they find a way then to simply get around the constraint by migrating.
Yeah, so local constraints mean I don't want to be in local constraints. Right?
Under those constraints, that's right.
Yeah, but if you remove some of those constraints, then they may not leave. So there's a hope there. Okay, anyway, any final points from you, Farrukh?
No, I think this is sort of pretty much the sense I had after spending a month there recently. As I said, IMF reports have this phrase that something like we have a bias for the upside, or our views are, my sense is at this point, if I had to characterize my position, is the greater risks lie on the downside.
Okay.
Right. The political system is not in good shape, and nothing really has happened on the economic policy side to suggest that after 3 years things will be much better.
Okay, so when should we take another look? 4 months, 6 months? Enough time has passed to
I
expect
would give it at least 6 months.
6 months. Okay,
At
fair enough.
least 6 months.
All right,
Yes,
so
yes.
let's see what happens in 6 months, whether we
Very good.
specialist, and I'll see you in 6 months on this show. Okay.
All right. Very good.
Thank
Thanks,
you
Subodh.
so
This was
much for
good.
being here.
All
To
right.
my viewers, I'll be back with another expert or another young person soon. In the meantime, bye everybody.